Natural law is described by the philosopher Peter Singer as a semi-official moral theology of the Roman Catholic Church. And that's a fair way of thinking about it. But we need to be clear that natural law theory goes right back to the Greeks. In fact, it goes back to Aristotle. And Aristotle argued in Nicomachean Ethics, his book of lecture notes, that there is one good that we all aim for ultimately, and that good is eudaimonia, the Greek word for the flourishing life, or if you like, the fulfilled life. And according to the Greeks, it is the telos, or the goal, which defines the goodness. So it is a teleological theory in its origin, which then gets worked out in deontological or rules, a rule-based ethics. So we should think about natural law really with the following idea. It is a deontological theory set within a Greek teleological worldview. And when the Christians conquered Spain way back in 1189, they took the city of Toledo and they discovered the entire works of Aristotle preserved by the Islamic world, and they started to translate them and to read them. And when Thomas Aquinas comes along in the 13th century, he takes the works of Aristotle and he tries to reconcile the ideas he found there with the Bible. So he comes up with a theory, and his starting point is really synderesis. Synderesis is a word that is very close to the Greek word for conscience, suneidesis, but it actually means an innate moral sense or a tendency to desire to pursue good ends, good goals. So synderesis is really the first principle of the natural law, and that's what Aquinas describes it as. Not to be confused with the primary precepts of the natural law, which he then goes on to describe in the following way. He says there are certain rational goals that we, because we are human, by our very natures, want to pursue. And conveniently, we can turn them into an acronym, the acronym POWER. P stands for preservation of life. O, the ordered society. W, the worship of God. E, education. And R, reproduction. These are the 5 primary, rational, general goals, notice, which are seen to be good because they are norms, they are good in themselves, because of the end that we are pursuing of the flourishing life. They fulfill the objectives of eudaimonia. So to Aquinas, these 5 rational primary precepts or goals are then translated into human laws and moral codes by the secondary precepts. So we take a primary precept, the preservation of life, for example, and then we turn it into a secondary precept, which is a moral rule. And that, in its turn, can be turned into a human law. So we have an act like the Abortion Act again, or the Suicide Act 1966, which makes it illegal to aid somebody in committing suicide. It makes it illegal to help somebody administer drugs in euthanasia to kill themselves. And it's been one of those tricky questions whether somebody who is administering a drug or helping somebody to die is actually committing a criminal offence. And so the secondary precepts are applications of the general primary precept. Now, secondary precepts are not absolute. It's a common confusion that people come up with that, thou shalt not kill gets translated into an absolute rule, thou shalt not abort. That was never the case. In fact, Aquinas makes it clear there is such an idea as the doctrine of double effect. Double effect means that if the primary intention is good, for example, to save a mother's life in a situation of abortion, then the secondary effect can be overridden, even though it may in itself be evil. So it's okay to kill a fetus if, and only if, you are saving a mother's life. And that is the situation as it applies in Northern Ireland at present. They apply, in their interpretation of abortion, They apply the principle of double effect, and they allow just that one exception. So this ultimate end is eudaimonia. What Thomas Aquinas actually relates to the state of blessedness after life in heaven. He argues that you'll only be ultimately fulfilled when you are living forever in heaven with Christ and with God. So he Christianizes the idea of eudaimonia, and he presents a case for saying that we need to believe in an afterlife where that fulfillment will finally be achieved. He doesn't say that nobody can achieve it without some kind of faith. But what you actually achieve is a form of fulfillment if you follow what he calls the human law. If you reflect in your own life the eternal law of God, you actually fulfill yourself to a certain extent. But to get a state of blessedness, you're going to need some help from the Holy Spirit. So to conclude, natural law is a universal moral theory of rational human conduct based on the Greek teleological worldview that then expresses itself in certain forms of law, such as human law, natural law, and divine law in the Bible. But ultimately, it's a reflection of the blueprint that is in the mind of God, what Aquinas calls the eternal law of God. It's like a diamond. At the top is the eternal law. From that we get the natural and divine law, and we should then apply that by passing human laws.